Namaskar, I'm Ashok Vyas, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming someone who started writing at the very early age. Her passion for writing made her sit with celebrities, and her interviews were published in a very prestigious newspaper called The Hindu. But that was something which started at the age 12, and later on she took up to serious writing, and we have had the pleasure of receiving non-fiction books from Nish Amarnath, the first being The Voyage to Excellence, which shared the story of 21 successful women leaders in the corporate world. She also wrote another book, Citi, and its Scuffle with Watchdogs, and this Citi is related to Citibank. And now that she has another offering in the form of a book which is fiction and a very intense and multi-layered story called Victims for Sale, and it is published by a very prestigious publication, and I'll have Nish share all about the joy of seeing her first fiction book published, and congratulations and welcome, Nish.
Thank you so much. Victims for Sale was certainly an interesting journey, and it was also a long time in the making. Victims for Sale is a psychological thriller novel set in London, and it is inspired from real incidents that I stumbled upon as a journalist on the field on assignment in 2006. So that's when I first started writing it, and HarperCollins has published and released it worldwide. And more broadly speaking, the book, within the ethos of a racy suspense novel, addresses the issue of sex trafficking and sexual exploitation of mentally challenged women. It is also a suspense novel, so I won't give away spoilers.
Yeah, but what we get is it must have been quite a demanding book to work on. Even if you have some tidbits of a few real life instances, to live them, to infuse life in them through your characters, it must be a psychological journey within also, I guess. Is that right?
Yes, that's absolutely true. I tend to wear the skin of my characters. I tend to, take on their moods and their emotions when I'm writing, and in the reality of that writing, but also when I'm not writing, when I'm in the space of my own reality, I tend to continue to wear the emotions and moods of my characters. So in that way, it was an interesting journey to write this book, to delve into the mind of the protagonist as well as other characters, lead characters or otherwise. And it was also interestingly, I've heard that, this book is more kind of masculine in some areas, just because of the gore involved in certain scenes. But in real life, I'm a person who feels like very faint at the sight of blood. I can't even watch a child get vaccinated on television. So writing those scenes were challenging for me because, given the gore and violence that was integral to the plot and the core of the book, I felt weak as I wrote it, or actually after I wrote it, I felt weak and kind of loose and things like that. So that was also interesting. I also felt anger as I was realistically addressing certain issues, mainly against the backdrop of honor crimes that continue to be rampant today, particularly among Indians and, more broadly speaking, South Asians in many different parts of the world.
So Nish, I interrupt you to sort of think loudly with you when all these issues are being mentioned, and people have read about them in newspapers, and there are many seminars or discussions happening, but when you translate them, or rather you offer them in the shape of fiction, then people are looking at the interesting read through all the overlap of various stories which finally became the fabric of your novel. So, talk to me about your focus on the element of your book being an interesting read. Is there some conscious effort on that side?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in terms of making it an interesting read, my focus was on getting into the emotions of the characters in question, in addition to the mystery in their external environment. So I really sought to strike a balance between infusing crime fiction with with a strong psychological component to it in a way that is extraordinarily real, and that was based on research, on fieldwork, interviews with Scotland Yard officials and barristers, BBC producers, and so on the field in London. I even sat in on a murder trial at the Old Bailey in London to really get a hang of how a crime of that magnitude would be addressed. But above and beyond that, I wanted to definitely get into the personal lives of the characters. So there are elements of romance, betrayal, passion. There's a lot of suspense, and strategically speaking, I sought to end many scenes with a question mark, or with with an incompleteness that would have the readers yearning for more and possibly miss their stops on the subway if they're
So
reading
as
it.
I read just few parts of the book, and I realized Nish Amarnath's skill on articulating her narrative helps you flow with her words in a way which makes it a source of joy and pleasure to read her writings. And there must have been a lot of tapasya, as the word in Hindi is, behind her coming up with a book which gets published by such a well-known publishing house, HarperCollins. Yeah. And it is not that we have many Indian American authors who write the kind of novels that she is writing, and who gets invited to IIMs or some prestigious educational institutes to talk about her writing, her book. And so that makes us feel proud on some level. Talking about your own experience of being aware of the identity which is rooted in India, and when you lived in London, so London probably forms the backdrop of your novel. How do you see place plays an important role as a character in these kind of fiction like Victims for Sale?
Right. So, yeah, thank you for your words. And I would say that place really for me is more an accessory, broadly speaking, but insofar as Victims for Sale is concerned, it is set in London, and it highlights among other things, the challenges faced by an Indian immigrant student who is also a stringer for the BBC, and who tries to take on part-time jobs to supplement her her loans and her income. So that's the human angle to it, which many Indians can relate to. And insofar as London is concerned, this book is also partly a police procedural. So it's exciting to bring in aspects of Westminster or London Eye, or even less obscure areas like Lambeth, which is Lambeth North, which is not place that a tourist might regularly go to. So I wanted to kind of bring to light the less explored parts of London, because when I went to London, I really feel that I found myself there, not just as a writer but also as a person. So that's as far as victims for sale is concerned. But a place in general is, really an accessory as I began this discourse. And what I mean by that is, I use places to paint a different emotional facet of the characters that I portray.
So may I request you to share some portion from your book, maybe the opening of Victims for Sale, any para that sets the tone of your book. Would you mind reading that for us?
Yeah, sure. So just to give a brief snapshot, my protagonist's name is Sandhya Raman, and she's known as Sandy. So I will read out the beginning, the opening scene of my novel, where she's, it's her first night in London as a paying guest with a British Indian family. So chapter 1 is titled An Unusual Reception. 17th September. A mass of charred and mutilated bodies spilled out from the mangled remains of the train behind me. The reverberation of ambulance sirens was omnipresent, and there were police everywhere. The tide of life and laughter that governed the vivacity of Mumbai was now a mere space in a hellish temporality that would blotch the annals of history in the time to come. Looking straight at the camera ahead of me, I was reporting the horror of the Mumbai bomb blasts for national multilingual broadcaster ABP News in a dispassionate tone that takes nerves of steel to put up during such a time. Halfway through my newscast, I froze. Sahil, he was on his way back from a meeting, wasn't he? That meant he would have been on the Western Line at this time. Oh God, you okay? The accompanying camera person asked me worriedly. Oh, my boyfriend, I croaked, whipping out my flip phone. I speed dialed Sahil. Nothing had happened to him, had it? A male voice seemed to be speaking to me. I exhaled in relief. Sahil's voice? Wait, something was wrong here. For starters, the accent was different. Almost at the same time this intelligent realization dawned on me, my fuzzed brain managed to trace the word unavailable somewhere in the message I was listening to. The next 24 hours blurred before me. All I could recall was clinging to what was recognizable of Sahil's lifeless form in a hospital morgue as I panted, sobbed, squirmed in anguish, and eventually threw up all over myself. The inhaler I clutched in my hand was the only indication that I would will myself to live, to go on. I bolted upright in bed, sweating profusely. If I were in my room back in Mumbai, I would have probably caught the glint of a cockroach on the windowsill. Instead, half-parted maroon blinds framed my view of a roseate sky. I'm in London now, I remembered, trying to shrug off my dream. No, this wasn't a dream. It had happened for real, back in June, and a flashback of that ordeal was haunting me in my sleep. I dived back under my duvet and wept softly. The rustle of a dress resonated into my ears from somewhere below me, then a pitter-patter of footsteps, the swish of a curtain. It was my first morning as a paying guest with the Savants, a traditional Indian family living in Britain since the mid-90s. My phone flashed Thursday, 4:15 a.m. Throwing back the covers, I padded over to my bedroom door, turned the knob, and stepped outside gingerly. A shadow emerged from the study downstairs, but the sounds were coming either from the kitchen or sitting room below. I edged toward the stairs and crept into the kitchen. A cup of coffee would help. I navigated my way through the darkness and put the kettle on. The footsteps behind me grew louder. I turned. This time I heard labored breathing. A dark figure towered over me. A woman in a long little bo-peep dress, a pair of bloodshot eyes glowering at me from under a cascade of thick unruly curls, a wild grimace pinching her lips. I had never seen her before. Dawn light glinted along the edge of her knife. I took a step backwards. The woman drew closer, tilting her head this way and that, as though dissecting me with her gaze. I backed away further, only to slam against the wall. The woman pointed the knife at my chest, its serrated edge grazing my clavicle. I squeezed my eyes shut.
Oh man. So you squeeze your eyes shut, and we were also thinking how fast-paced uh, imagination, but on that track, which is practically a thriller coming from Nish Amarnath with references of real life instances. Fictionalized is the correct way, but when I was listening to you, I felt there are influences of literary work as well as that which we say is received well by readers. And if I bring it to the cinema's language, then there is a classical cinema, there is a commercial cinema. So do you see yourself somewhere in between these two sides of literary expression? You probably must have read some authors who you like very much. Somewhere consciously, unconsciously, their impressions remain and probably are reflected in your writing also. Would you say that there are favorite authors that you have?
Yeah, so I like Thomas Hardy, particularly Test of the D'Urbervilles, and Janice Parriott as an author in general. I admire her writings, and I've read commercial fiction too very widely, mainly John Grisham, Mary Higgins Clark, Gillian Flynn, so on and so forth. I like Charles Dickens, particularly A Tale of Two Cities. I've read very widely, so I don't have like just one favorite. I have a group of favorites. I'm not sure I can give a black and white answer to that question.
I think it's a great question, and there's great answer, and that's perfectly fine. And now let's move towards your dedication towards writing, or the inner calling to write. You are more, as an independent journalist, you have written on the economic subjects.
Yes.
So, how these two sides merge in writer, author Nish Amarnath, your understanding of how the economic world functions, and typically we consider them as two different sides. Do you see where I'm coming from?
Yes, yes. So the common thread I find between two of those spaces is that of the human mind. For example, I've extensively covered deals, loan transactions, and investments, and so on for publications like Dow Jones, the Wall Street Journal, S&P Global, Institutional Investor, and so on. And when I report on a deal, my mind immediately goes to the psyches of the people who were involved in that transaction, the CEOs of both companies, or a fight between a lawyer and the CEO of a company who does not want to sell for a lower price, and so on. So that's really, that focus is really an offshoot of my personal interest in the human psyche, in human relationships, and in fiction. So when I started out writing, I started writing fiction and then moved on to journalism. So that's the common thread that I have sought to draw. And in fiction, I feel that I'm able to give free play to the psyches of my characters.
Okay, so there is so much that one can learn from Nish Amarnath with varied experience of having lived at different places, including India, of course, and London, and the couple of other places that has attracted you. I go back to your first book, which is non-fiction, that is The Voyage to Excellence, and this was sharing the life of 21 women leaders. Would you see yourself now somewhere, if you were to write the same niche, you are somewhere in those 21 women now?
Well, I do have a long way to go, and the Voyage to Excellence focused on the personal stories of India's 21 most successful women business leaders. I would say that authors are entrepreneurs. They do have to be entrepreneurs. So in that sense, I am an entrepreneur. But I also believe in being my real self. In that scenario, my focus is to give my all to my writing, to the stories to the narratives that I build, the stories that I develop, fiction or non-fiction, and give it my best and really make the readers feel everything that the characters are feeling, whether it's an article or a non-fiction book or a fiction novel.
So how satisfying this has been, the way the book is received, and when you go and you talk on your book tour to various places, what kind of questions generally come to you?
Well, I'm very, very thankful to all my readers of Victims for Sale. I'm very happy with the feedback it has received, with the critical acclaim that it has got. And it's doing very well in markets like India. And I have been speaking at various different forums, including programs at the US Embassy and consulates across India. So I've spoken, among other things, at the US consulates in Chennai and Delhi and Kolkata. We have had the US consulate in Hyderabad involved. I've spoken at bookstores like Oxford bookstores in Odissi and elsewhere, at colleges like Stella Maris. Really on the art of writing and literature, but also the art of writing against the backdrop of the contemporary digital era we live in and the social issues that are rampant today. So, I'll be speaking at IIM Ahmedabad in December and a few other places. I feel like a sense of home when I hear back from my readers, because when a reader says that he or she has felt really engrossed and or cried or really empathized with a character, that gives me satisfaction as a writer.
So lastly, it is happening everywhere now, the social media and the promotion of whether the film or the book. So one side, a writer, after having, like you in your case, having completed Victims for Sale, it reaches the publisher, it gets published. So one cycle is done in terms of your creative expression through this book. But then there is another cycle which is in the form of book tour, and you go and address. And so do you think it requires additional effort, energy, creativity on your part to go out there and sort of introduce your book or respond to readers' questions? Is it enjoyable or it is taxing?
To be honest, I would say a bit of both. I really enjoy being approachable to my readers, connecting with my readers. I enjoy interacting and engaging with young people, encouraging young people to read and read more. But also I see a dichotomy in general. This is not with reference to myself. And the dichotomy I see is that for writers, often many writers have struggled to strike a balance between the promotional, marketing and book tour aspects of their trade and with the writing itself, because the writing and the research, that's a full-time job. It takes not just your time, but it can take everything out of you. So I would say that as a writer, it's important to find a balance there, not do too much of one or the other, and definitely create a space to connect with the public, connect with your readers. And I believe in letting my work speak for itself. So I'm all for promotions and things like that, so long as it informs the public in some way or is useful.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Nish. And I think we also created this platform whereby some of your readers or the potential readers got an idea about Victims for Sale. But what we are happy and proud is the kind of writing that is happening and the kind of dedication and passion for writing that we have among Indian American women like Nish, Amarnath, and that also gives a special recognition to the creative juice which is flowing, rooted in India. And through her book, when she connects not only with her readers but with her audience, the perception is refined for all of us in a special way, and there is much more in terms of knowing about the artist and the writer. That process will continue with more conversations in this series with lots of good wishes. Nish, thank you very much for joining us here at ITV Studio.
Thank you so much, Ashok. I enjoyed this. Thank you.
My guest today, Nish Amarnath, her recent book, latest non-fiction, First, Victims for Sale. Thanking her for joining us and thanking all of you for being with us this Ashok. Yes.